Hello, everyone. This is the first edition of the Convergence Podcast series, where we interview movers and shakers in the brain health space. These movers and shakers is the US biotech company Mind Med, which is at the forefront of psychedelic drug development. It's now my pleasure to welcome Dan Karlin, Chief Medical Officer at Mind Med. Hey, Dan.
Hey, thanks so much, Daniel. It's a real pleasure to be here with you.
Likewise. So MindMed recently made big news announcing the FDA breakthrough therapy designation to its lead candidate MM120 for treating generalized anxiety disorder, which is considered a large unmet need. Dan, can you please introduce yourself, your company, and the MM120 program? Which problem are you trying to solve with this asset and how?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So I'm Dan Karlin, like you said. I'm a psychiatrist by training. I'm also board certified in addictions and in clinical informatics. And I'm the chief medical officer at MindMed. MindMed is a company that's focused on brain health disorders. So we're focused on a wide range of what might be called psychiatric or mental health disorders, as well as adjacent conditions. The MM120 program is LSD. It's a pharmacologically optimized form of LSD, but fundamentally in the body, it behaves like the LSD that we've heard about since it was first used almost 80 years ago. And LSD has this tremendously rich history in research. Before it was made a Schedule One illicit substance, a substance that was deemed to have no medical application, psychiatrists and other researchers had done a pretty substantial body of work trying to treat a variety of disorders with doses of this chemical. And so, what we've done over the past 3 to 4 years is develop this pharmaceutically optimized version of the drug and begun a series of experiments, both non-clinical, so animal studies, to establish that the drug is in fact safe, and that's what we continue to find, and that's what was historically known, and human research to show that, like you said, we can treat this disorder called generalized anxiety disorder. In the modern research literature, LSD has been shown to be effective against anxiety disorders and depressive disorders. And so where we've started in the phase 2B research and the breakthrough designation that you referenced are all oriented around the treatment of generalized anxiety disorder. And so the breakthrough status is a recognition from FDA that we've provided adequate human evidence to suggest that we provide a benefit in an unmet medical need in a way that exceeds what's currently available to patients. And so it will make the process of getting to our phase 3 studies, and ultimately, if we're successful in phase 3, bringing this MM120 drug to the clinical treatment environment.
Dan, could you talk a little bit about the mechanism of the drug? I mean, how does it work? How does LSD affect anxiety levels?
It's a great question, which is what's the mechanism? How does this drug help people with uh, anxiety or depression? And the easiest answer is we don't really know, and that is very often the case when we're talking about drugs to treat mental health disorders. You know, when it comes to psychiatry and brain health in general, mechanism is still pretty theoretical. So we don't know the mechanism of illness for generalized anxiety disorder. We don't know uh, the mechanism of illness for depression. And with drugs that have been used for a very long time, like for the last 30 years, we've been using this class of drug called serotonin reuptake inhibitors. We don't fully even know how those work, despite the fact that they've been used for a long time. But we can have theories about how the drugs work. And so the theory for MM120 is that we know the acute effects of the drug, so the acute perceptual and cognitive changes that come when you take MM120 are largely mediated by a receptor called serotonin 2A or 5-HT2A. And when the drug binds to that receptor, it causes a whole series of changes acutely in the brain. the, there's this set of circuits that have been identified via fMRI research called the default mode network. And one of the jobs that our brain does when it's at rest and that these circuits are implicated in is filtering. That so much of the work of our cognitive systems, our executive function systems, is reducing the amount of extraneous stimuli that have to be interpreted by the conscious mind. So that when you look at the world, you turn it into a series of interpretable structures. And what happens when folks take MM120 or other classic psychedelic drugs is that filtering apparatus gets turned way down. And so the set of stimuli that come from both the external worlds or perceptual stimuli, like things you see or hear or feel, change. The way that we perceive them changes, and internal stimuli. So the thoughts we have about ourselves, about the future, about our relationship to the world also aren't going through the usual filtering mechanisms. So this creates this period of time that in the use of this drug for non-medical purposes, it's called the trip, but we call it a session. But during this time, people perceive both the external world and their internal world through a different set of lenses. So there's a psychological mechanism where this period of changed perception leads to a changed view of oneself and one's relationship to the world. And then we know that the drug also creates this downstream long-term period of increased neuroplasticity. So our brains are constantly changing, right? And it's even this conversation is changing both of our brains, and anyone who listens to it and remembers it because their brain has structurally changed to create those memories. But what MM120 does is create new opportunities for neuroplasticity in parts of the brain that are usually less plastic. So there's this opportunity for the psychological experience that happens acutely to be encoded physically in the brain in a different way than it would be if it were just, say, a normal memory that you formed in your day-to-day life. And that, as best we can tell, is what causes the lasting clinical change, the lasting clinical improvement in folks' anxiety with generalized anxiety disorder. And the way we've tested this drug is just a single dose in a clinical setting with no adjuvant therapy, no other drugs, no psychotherapy. And what we're seeing is really a remarkably high rate of persistent change out to 12 weeks, which is how far out we looked from that dose.
Dan, I would like to drill down a little bit more on the recent study results. So one big discussion point at the moment is the expected cost of psychedelic-assisted therapy. Mind Med announced that treatment with a single dose of MM120 demonstrated rapid, clinically meaningful, and statistically significant improvements in the anxiety rating scale versus placebo at week 4. You also mentioned that at the secondary endpoint at 12 weeks, you delivered a very strong 65% response rate, 48% remission rate. I mean, this is quite significant. Does that mean talk therapy would not be needed for the treatment? And if yes, what would be the implications on cost? And generally, how would your treatment protocol look like?
Yeah, those numbers are exactly right. So we saw this remarkable response and remission rate, and we saw that in the absence of any sort of psychotherapy protocol. So we didn't deliver psychotherapy as a component of the trial. Folks have talked about psychedelic assisted psychotherapy for quite some time. And at some level, it was taken as established that the drug depended on a program of psychotherapy to be effective. We have a very positive view of psychotherapy as a whole. I practice psychotherapy. I'm trained as a psychiatrist, but this sort of treatment I personally prefer to deliver is a psychotherapeutic one. So our not using psychotherapy in our trials isn't a statement about our view of the value of psychotherapy. In fact, we think psychotherapy is so valuable and so effective that we needed to test our drug without it. We know psychotherapy works. We didn't know until we did this study whether MM120 would work without psychotherapy. Now, does that mean it might work better with psychotherapy? Sure, right? But what we were trying to do as a pharmaceutical company is develop the drug in such a way that it can be brought into the psychiatric care system and be another tool that can be given without psychotherapy if people want that kind of treatment modality, or it could be given with the sorts of psychotherapy that people are already delivering today. So really the goal of this program is to maximize the chances that folks in need will be able to get and have uh, their treatment covered by payers. So get the drug and have it covered by third party payers, just like any other medicine would be. And so by reducing the need for ancillary services alongside the drug, we think we're increasing the chances that more folks who want to get this treatment or who need to get this treatment will be able to access it if and when we get it approved.
So Dan, what are the next steps for MM120 following the breakthrough therapy designation, and what challenges do you anticipate?
Yeah, so like we said before, the breakthrough therapy makes our ability to engage with and get alignment with US FDA easier. So that as we move forward with this designation with the program, we expect to be able to reach strong alignment with the agency about what a package would look like when we submit for a drug approval. The next step is to have an end of phase 2 meeting where we discuss the results of our phase 2 study with the agency and get alignment on our phase 3 plan. We will do that in this half of this year. And then we will run phase 3 studies. 2 phase 3 studies is the usual standard for getting a drug approval, and we intend to do that. And we have uh, guided that we will be starting phase 3 in the second half of this year. So that's what's upcoming for the program.
Got it. Thank you. And last but not least, can you briefly touch also on the other assets in your pipeline and also the indications you're addressing?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So we've indicated that MM120, based on the phase 2 data and some of the academic research we're aware of, there's a suggestion that MM120 could be applicable in other disease areas such as depression. So we will very likely be pursuing additional indications for MM120 beyond GAD. We also have a molecule that we call MM402, and that is the right enantiomer. So MDMA is a racemic molecule generally. It's got a right and left enantiomer. And what we'll do here is use the right enantiomer in a development program targeting the core symptoms of autism spectrum disorder. So social cognition, social communication. That program is currently in phase 1. And then we've got early exploratory work going on with other potential molecules, but those have not reached the clinic yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And to wrap up, we have a question that we will ask all of our guests. What is the biggest blind spot we have in society?
Well, we have a lot of blind spots in society as a whole, unfortunately, and we see evidence of that in so much of the interpersonal uh, strife and conflict and armed conflict, even that you would hope that we, as people who are aware of our own existence and aware of the existence of others who have an interiority that's a lot like ours, you would hope that wouldn't be our reality in the current era. But I tend to point back around this question to the origins of modern psychiatry. Uh, People like the early psychoanalysts, like Sigmund Freud, who discovered something that remains true today, which is that through our early development in childhood and adolescence and into adulthood, we create defense mechanisms. We create ways of protecting ourselves from things that are frightening and traumatic. And those defense mechanisms get brought forward into adult life and can lead to maladaptive uh, behaviors and maladaptive thought patterns and distress ultimately and in many cases, an inability to feel uh, a full degree of closeness to the world, to other people, and even alienation from one's own feelings and oneself.
Mm.
That concept remains as applicable today as it ever was. And so the project of fundamentally making the unconscious conscious is the job of psychotherapy and ultimately the job of psychiatry, and it's the way to create lasting change in how folks feel about themselves and how they feel about their relationship to others and to the world. And that is so often lost in the discourse uh, around kind of everything, because it's applicable to our entire experiences as people.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Dan. Thank you very much, MindMed, and please keep up the good work.
Thanks so much for having me on.